I'm James. It's here in the garden where I learned about doing the will of God, no matter what. I think I learned more from that night than any other time I was with Jesus. It's been a long day. We'd prepared our Passover and celebrated it. It's a major Jewish holiday. We were tired. Jesus taught us up until the wee hours of the morning. We ended up here in the garden. Jesus asked us to stay up and pray with him. He went over there and prayed. We went over here and slept. 3 times he came to us. 3 times. Still today, it haunts me that while he was conceding to die for our sins, he was tortured to death, that we slept. He continued with his prayer, not thy will but thine. We'd never seen Jesus in such distress. It's the only time we'd ever seen Jesus not want to do something of his Father's will. He was in such distress, he sweated drops of blood. But it was those words, it is not thine will, but not thine, that struck with me that night. A loud commotion woke us up. It took us a minute to realize a crowd of about 700 people were coming up the hill. They came closer. Jesus asked them. They said, "Jesus of Nazareth." With a resounding voice, he said, "I am he," and they all fell to the ground. Amazing. Those disciples did not. They came closer, closer. Peter drew his sword and charged one of the soldiers. The man ducked, and Peter caught his ear. I think Peter was going for his head, but I don't know. Peter doesn't talk about it today. Jesus reached down, grabbed the ear, placed it back on the man's head, and healed him. He went away crying. The soldiers, undeterred, stood up and came closer. They were coming. They arrested Jesus. We didn't know what to do. We were afraid and scared. We ran away. Fortunately, God's forgiven me for that too. But if I learned anything from that night, it was to do God's will first and my will second. Take it from me, the cost of the first to die for the faith. It's the only way to live.
I'll never forget that night. It was probably the worst night of my life. That was certainly the most difficult. But I learned a valuable lesson that night that I hope to share with you today. I remember we were there in the Garden of Gethsemane. We had gone there after we had observed the Passover meal together, something we've been looking forward to. And I remember I was very tired. It was the Passover, so we enjoyed ourselves. We ate a little bit more than we usually do. But Jesus had said some things to us during the meal that I didn't quite know how to take. Over the course of the evening, as we were talking and whatnot, Jesus made the statement that he said, "Tonight, all of you are going to lose courage and betray me. You're all going to desert me." And I remember when Jesus said that, I thought to myself, there's no way. And I remember I jumped up and I said, "Lord, hey, I don't know about these other guys, but I can tell you for certain, I will never betray you. I'm willing to lay down my life for you. I'm willing to go to prison for you. I'm never going to betray you." And I remember Jesus cut me off mid-sentence. He said, "Peter, tonight before the rooster crows, you're going to deny that you even know who it is." I didn't even respond. I just was taken aback. But anyway, after the meal, we went there to the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus told us, "Keep watch and pray." And I tried. I gave it a good try, but I was exhausted from the evening. I was full, and I dozed off. I fell asleep. I remember I awoke to the sound of men approaching. I looked up and I could see them coming with torches and clubs and sharpened steel. And Judas was with him. It was the Herodians. I knew what they were coming for. And I remember I acted before I thought. And you know me. You know that that's something I'm well known for. And I remember there was a sword close by, and I grabbed it and I ran right at one of the soldiers. I meant to cut off his head, but I only cut off his ear. And I remember Jesus stopped me and said, Peter, put away your sword. Anyone who takes the sword is going to perish by the sword. I remember he picked up the man's ear. His name was Barnabas. And he put it right back in its place and killed him right there on the spot. Something I'd seen our Lord do many times. But here's the part that struck me. They bound Jesus and they led him. And I remember thinking, why is he letting this happen? Because this is not the first time that they had ever tried to take Jesus by force. There were a number of times during his ministry, both in Galilee and Judea, that they tried to seize him. There were times they tried to stone him. But every time they would do this, Jesus would walk his way right through the crowd. It was as though they could not touch him. I remember at one point, even in his hometown of Nazareth, after he'd spoken in the synagogue, they tried to push him over the side of the cliff, but he just walked his way right through the crowd. I remember thinking, what's going on here? Why is he allowing himself to be taken? Well, they took him to the palace of the high priest. And I remember I was there in the courtyard with other people. And there was a window very similar to this one here. I could just barely peer in and see what was going on. Jesus was there before the Sanhedrin. Not all of them. They didn't tell everyone. But they were making all kinds of accusations against him. And accusing him. And he just sat there and let them I remember a young girl pointed out that she said, I've seen you with him before. And I said, no, girl, I don't know the man. There were other people there in the crowd that said, no, you're also a Galilean. I remember saying, I don't know every Galilean. And I remembered those words that Jesus spoke, that I had denied him. And I remember I just took off running. I was so ashamed of myself. I ran back to the garden and began to pray. And I remembered at that moment that Jesus knew my sin and had already forgiven me.
I'm Pilate. I'm the governor of Judea, a hot, dusty, troublesome region, contentious people, notably the Council of Jews. Except in cases of extreme crime and punishment, the local people are judged by the local people. And yet, one morning at the crack of dawn, the Pharisees woke me up with an angry mob demanding the trial and punishment of a Galilean named Jesus. If he's a Galilean, let the Galileans handle him, and sent him to King Herod. He simply mocked him and returned him back to him. My wife warned me. She'd had a dream about this man. She said he was a righteous man, that I should not get involved with him. Her dream had troubled her greatly since she had it. But the Pharisees insisted this man was a criminal and should be interrogated, so I did. When I did so, I realized he was different than any other prisoner I'd ever spoken to. Most, when they face judgment, are cowed. They beg forgiveness, they plead their innocence. Not Jesus. He looked me in the eye. He spoke with authority, not arrogance. I said, they say you're the king of the Jews. Are you a king? He said, my kingdom is not of this world. I was born to speak truth to this world. And all those who know the truth hear my voice. And I heard it. And I knew he didn't deserve to die. I took him before the people and I said, I find no guilt in this man. And yet they insisted that I crucify him. Crucify him. It was customary on the day of feast to release a condemned man, so I offered to release him. And yet they chose Barabbas, a known criminal of Rome, a murderer. But they released him and said to execute Jesus. He said, this man has done nothing. I will not have his blood on my hands. So I had him scourged. It's a heinous punishment, but it's not death. They flayed the flesh from his back. Even then, he never said a word. He never pled for them to stop. And when it was over, I brought him to the people one last time. And I said, he's been punished, but he has done nothing to warrant death. What should I do with him? Crucify him, they said. He's declared himself a king. If you let him go, you're no friend of Caesar. What was I to do? I don't have authority to judge blasphemy against their faith. I sent him to Herod. Herod sent him back. I offered Barabbas. They chose Jesus. I offered punishment. They chose death. And I was afraid. I was afraid of Caesar. I was afraid of that mob. And most of all, I was afraid of the authority with which he spoke. Truth so authentic that it threatened even the priests and the kings of his own people. They felt threatened by his truth. How much more should I feel threatened? Or even Rome? So I washed my hands of it. I absolved my responsibility. And I watched him take this innocent man, wearing a crown of thorns, away to his death. In my wife's dream, she saw men, women, and children crying for this man in the thousands of millions. It was my name they called to blame. I look at my hands, and the blood won't wash clean. And I wonder, did I condemn the Son of God?
I'm Simon, and we're not from this country. My children and I traveled from Cyrene in North Africa to Jerusalem to observe Passover. That year, we observed the most extraordinary Passover ever. As we made our way out of the city, there were huge, angry crowds all over the city. We found out that day there were 3 men scheduled to be executed by crucifixion. I held closely to my children to keep from losing them in the crowd. But the crowd kept pushing us towards the road. And I could see in the distance the three men dragging their crosses, the Roman soldiers beating them as they went. As they got closer to us, I could see that one of the men that I now know as Jesus had been beaten to the point that he barely resembled a man. He was covered in blood and lashes. His back was beaten so much that his ribs were exposed from the lashings. As they got right in front of us, Jesus fell under the weight of his cross, and he just couldn't get up. He couldn't carry it anymore. The Roman soldiers beat him, trying to make him get back up and carry it, but he just couldn't. One of the Roman soldiers looked at me and yelled, "You pick it up, carry it." I was terrified. There were people everywhere. Why me? I was just a random person in the crowd. I had my children. I looked at the people next to me and behind me thinking maybe he meant them. But he didn't. He meant me, and I knew it. As he looked at me and I looked at him, I was terrified. I was afraid to leave my kids, but I was afraid what he would do if I didn't pick it up. I was afraid he would beat me like the other men. So I left my kids and picked it up. Afraid what he would do if he had to tell me again. As I picked it up, I felt the wood, the weight on my back. And I immediately thought about how hard it would have been to carry this if I had stripes on my back that went all the way back to my ribs. And feel the splinters dig into my skin and my bones. It was hard to carry, and I was in good shape, healthy, and hadn't been beaten. I carried it the rest of the way up the hill. It was hard. I was afraid that they would beat me too. They didn't. We carried it up to the hill they called Golgotha, the hill that looked like a skull. When we got to the top, I threw the cross down and took off. I had to find my kids lost in the crowd. Then we watched as they nailed the men to their crosses. I thought about later the weight of that wood, that the weight of the wood was hard enough to carry. But the weight of the wood was more, the weight on Jesus' shoulders was more than just the wood. It was the weight of our sins on his shoulders. Our sins, the sins of the world. I thought about how thankful that I was for that day, that even though I was terrified, to help Jesus to bear his cross. And I thought about the blood that covered my hands and my clothes, and that it might wash out, but ultimately that blood would wash away our sins, my sins.
I am a proud Roman soldier, a centurion, a leader in the army. My job is to lead the condemned men to their deaths. I make their death as painful as possible to prevent others from rising up against my empire. I feel nothing for the condemned, nothing. Not fear, nor weakness, nor pain, nor suffering, for I am not allowed to be weak. I feel nothing for the accused until one day, the day I met the man they called Jesus. I remember his trial. It was a trial like none other. As he stood in front of the court, no evidence was ever brought against him. His main accuser and even the governor himself declared him to be innocent. But it was the people. The people wanted Jesus to die. Crucify him, they shouted, and his sentence was cast. So my soldiers and I led Jesus away, where we whipped him and beat him. We stripped him of his clothes. We mocked him and dressed him in a scarlet robe and put a crown of thorns upon his head. We proclaimed him the King of the Jews. It was then I remembered I'd heard about Jesus, that he was some kind of a teacher, that he had followers and even performed some miracles. And I wondered, where are your followers now, O teacher? Why do you stand here silent and alone? I ordered Jesus to pick up his cross, to carry it up to Calvary for his death. Along the path, he collapsed under the weight, and I selected a man out of the crowd to carry it for him, to bear his burden. When we reached the summit of Golgotha, I laid Jesus on the beam. I've done this 1,000 times, and let me tell you, this is the moment where men struggle. This is the moment where men summon all their strength to fight and resist their sentence. But not this man, not Jesus. He looked at me, and he opened his hands. He opened his hands to accept my nails, his sentence. I knew then this man was innocent. This was a righteous man, and I was the guilty. And a wave of sorrow overtook me. I had to look away. As I drove my nails into his flesh and hung him from the cross, I grew sick, and I had to look away. But I could still hear him. He didn't cry out and moan or lament me like the others. He prayed. He prayed like no man prayed before. He asked forgiveness to the criminal that hung next to him. He asked another man to care for his mother. And then he cried out to his Father and said, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And I knew he meant me. My knees became weak. I could barely continue about my task, but I hoped the routine would get me through. So I began to gamble and cast lots for his garments. It was then I thought, if this man is who he proclaims to be, then why does he not fly from here? Why does he not make a miracle, strike down his enemies, and leave this place, end his suffering? But he didn't. He stayed. And then the sun went black. It was as dark as night, but it was shortly afternoon. I could barely see my hand in front of my face, and I was overwhelmed with fear. I was afraid. And then Jesus called out and said he was thirsty. So I took him some soured wine as part of the torture. But this time I hoped that it would ease his pain and his suffering. When he was finished, as I stood there, he cried out, "It is finished." and the earth shook mightily. And I fell to my knees in fear for what I had done, and I begged God for forgiveness. But in that moment, I knew that I was. But when I looked up at the cross and I saw Jesus, I knew this man truly was the Son of God.
My name is Mary, and I too have a story to tell you about Jesus. My story begins though long before I met him. You see, I was plagued by demons. 7 demons. They terrorized me, beat me. I was losing my mind. I was outcast from my town. I was helpless and scared and alone. And then one day I met him, this man named Jesus, and he healed me, and he healed my mind and my body and my soul. He forgave me of everything that I'd done. I had a new beginning, and nobody had ever done that for me before. From that day forward, I was his disciple. I followed him everywhere. There was nothing that was more worthwhile than giving everything that I had and everything that I was in service to him. I saw the multitudes and the miracles. I heard the sermons and I listened to his teachings. Looking back, I remember that he was trying to prepare us for the things that were to come. But I don't think we ever grasped that he would die. Certainly not the cruel death on a cross. He was sinless. I would just cover my ears when he would talk about his death. I couldn't imagine not being by his side. But during and after the trial, there were some disciples that fled his side out of fear. Some flat out denied any association with him. Not me. There was nothing any Pharisee or Roman could do to me that would make me leave his side. I'd rather die than leave his side. And as gruesome as it was to watch him bloodied, spat on, mocked, crucified, I couldn't look away. He had been more than willing to look at me in my most gruesome state. I was going to continue with him in his. After that, we wrapped his body in linen cloths and we laid it inside Joseph's tomb. I remember the stone rolled over the front of the tomb. It was so cold, and I prayed that that coldness would just wake me from some horrible dream. 3 days later, after the Sabbath, it was time to give his body a proper burial. I grabbed some linen and some spices and we headed off toward the tomb. I didn't even think how we would get that stone rolled away. And when we got there, the stone had been rolled away. And there was an angel, and he asked us, "Why do you seek the living among the dead? He's not here. He's risen." He reminded us of all of the things that Jesus had told us, how he would die and rise again on the third day. He showed us the inside of the tomb. There was only linen cloths where his body had been laid. He told us to spread the news. And I don't know if it was fear or excitement, but we ran. And eventually, we ran into Peter and John and told them everything that we had seen. Still not quite believable for us. We headed back to the tomb, thinking maybe somebody had just moved his body from one tomb to another. Then suddenly, he was there before me. Jesus. He was alive. It was true. The Son of Man would die and rise again on the third day. And it was in that moment that I realized the power of God is not limited in his physical presence and the things that he can conquer. No. The power of God can conquer fear and sin, demons, even death. Not only on that day, but every day of eternity.